Welcome to Dictators v Democrats. This is the weekly roundup dated the 4th of November 2025. On this program, we go over the news in the war against democracy in the past week and give you the kind of spark notes, the summary, so if anybody asks, you kind of have an idea what's going on. This week, we have prosecutions, alleged persecutions, and saber rattling. If you do enjoy this program, though, please do like, share, and subscribe. I'm getting a goodly number of subscribers recently. And do check out the weekly podcast, Dictators v Democrats, Why We Fight, which is where I talk to, well, freedom fighters from around the world and find out why they do it. Right, so firstly, we're going to go on to the Hong Kong front, where another blow has been struck against free people and free society in the territory. The territory's top court has rejected an application from a significant pro-democracy activist, Chow Hang-tung, to stop a subversion trial against her and a group which had organized memorials in honor of the victims of the Tiananmen Square massacre. You should always be nervous when the term subversion is thrown about. It is a dangerous word in Tim Snyder's analysis. Cho, a former chair of the now disbanded Hong Kong Alliance in support of patriotic democratic movements of China, that's a bit of a mouthful, and two others, Albert Ho and Li Chioqian, face up to life imprisonment for, quote, inciting the subversion of state power under Hong Kong's infamous national security law. She's accused of incitement, quote, to organize, plan, commit, or participate in acts by unlawful means with a view to subverting state power. Now, the national security law is vague by design. Some of my previous interviewees on Why We Fight have discussed this. And this is part of the authoritarian playbook. Never tell people directly where the line they may not cross is. And this forces them to police themselves, to self-censor, etc., and gives authorities the tools to place the line wherever they feel they need it on a case-by-case basis. And Cho has said that she doesn't understand what unlawful means were, and that she is accused of using. Now, setting the lines in this case, prosecutor Ned Liai said, quote, unlawful means referred to any means aimed at ending the Chinese Communist Party's leadership that would violate China's constitution. He particularly referred to the preamble in Article 1 of the constitution, which forcibly cement the socialist system as the fundamental system of China. Ironic, given that modern China is one of the most hyper-capitalist societies extant today, and Hong Kong, once a city spoken of alongside London, Tokyo, New York, has now become a warning. And Cho's trial, along with the trial of other figures such as Jimmy Lai, is a real example of that. Hong Kong's freedom has been stolen from it, and the Chinese Communist Party no longer holds to the promise that was made in 1997 of one party, two systems, and that freedom and civil rights would remain in the territory of Hong Kong. This should be a warning to all of those who want to deal with authoritarians, to deal with dictators, is that, well, they lie, and they lie often. Onto the Nigerian front, and sticking to his campaign pledge to be a non-interventionist president, Donald Trump has ordered the US military to prepare for action in Nigeria to tackle Islamist militant groups after accusing the Nigerian government of failing to protect Christians. Trump failed to say precisely what killings he was talking about, but claims of a genocide against Nigeria's Christians have been spreading among right-wing US media in recent weeks. Notably, though, the president hasn't used the word genocide because that may obligate him towards certain actions. Trump said, quote, they're killing record numbers of Christians in Nigeria, they're killing the Christians, and they're killing them in very large numbers. We're not going to allow that to happen. On Saturday, he warned he would send in the US military, quote, guns a-blazin. Okay. Did he just watch like an 80s action flick? and further displayed his diplomatic prowess by threatening to cut off aid to what he called the, quote, now disgraced country. On a bit of a roll, he added, if we attack, it will be fast, vicious, and sweet, just like the terrorist thugs attacked our cherished, all in capitals, Christians. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth replied to Trump's statement in a slightly Grima Wormtongue-esque manner, stating, yes, sir, the Department of War is prepared for action. Either the Nigerian government protects the Christians, or we will kill the Islamic terrorists who are committing these horrible atrocities, end quote. Now, there are significant security challenges in Nigeria, nobody is denying that, but according to monitoring groups, the violence is more or less evenly split between the two religious groups. Jihadist groups such as Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa Province have been active in northeastern Nigeria for more than a decade, killing thousands of people, mostly Muslims, according to ACLED, a political violence monitor. In central Nigeria, there are often clashes between Muslim herders and Christian farmers over access to resources such as water and pasture land, causing tit-for-tat violence that has also killed thousands. Now, a Nigerian presidential advisor, Daniel Bwala, told the BBC that Nigeria would welcome US help, but emphasized Nigeria's sovereignty and stated that any action against these jihadist terrorist groups would have to be a joint operation. Again, saber rattling from the peace president. Now, onto a bit more of that, trying to avoid sounding like a broken record is a touch difficult in this day and age. On the Venezuelan front, this has been something that's been brewing for a little while. Trump has engaged in a lot of activity around Venezuela in recent weeks, some of which could be defined as criminal. The US military has killed 64 people in 15 strikes against 16 boats as part of a campaign that Washington claims is aimed at stopping the flow of drugs to the United States. These are airstrikes, drone strikes against what the administration claims are cartel fast boats carrying drugs. Now, the Trump administration told Congress that the US is in a, quote, armed conflict against drug cartels and labeled those killed as, quote, unlawful combatants, claiming that the ability to engage in lethal strikes was protected under a classified Justice Department ruling. It is concerning that the public have not been able to review the ruling in question. Members of Congress and human rights groups have been sounding the alarm, and this is compounded by the fact that the Trump administration has not provided any evidence linking the strikes to either the presence of narcotics on the boats or the affiliation of slain crew to the drug cartels. Now, I would say it is likely that some, if not most, of those strikes were carried out against cartel boats. It is quite common for cartels to use fast boats to transport drugs. However, the main issue here is the lack of transparency and the lack of real debate around doing this before, well, doing it. And the US military has been engaged in a quite significant buildup of warships, fighter jets, marines, drones, spy planes, bombers, etc. in the Caribbean Sea, the largest deployment there of such forces for decades, and this has raised concerns of a possible US invasion or intervention in Venezuela. But Trump has played these down, telling CBS's 60 Minutes, quote, I doubt it, I don't think so, but they've been treating us very badly. However, when pushed on whether or not the US is planning any strikes on land, he refused to deny it, saying, quote, I wouldn't be inclined to say that I would do that. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do with Venezuela, if I was going to do it or if I wasn't going to do it. I guess that's maybe an attempt at strategic ambiguity. US B-52 bombers have carried out what are called attack demonstrations off Venezuela's coast, and Trump has authorized the deployment of the CIA to the country and sent the world's largest aircraft carrier to the region. And Venezuela's dictator, let's remember here, Venezuela is a pretty unpleasant dictatorship. Maduro previously accused Washington of, quote, fabricating a new war. And while regime change and democratization of Venezuela is a goal that many Venezuelans, including Nobel laureate Marina Corina Machado, have been working towards, a full US invasion would be a significant strategic area that risks destabilizing the region and eroding US soft power globally. I hope that all this bluster and saber rattling from Trump is, well, just that. Finally, onto terra firma, which is the global front, the climate front, because you can't have freedom, you can't have democracy on a dead world, and we need to start getting really quite serious about this. The EU is unfortunately considering a break clause to its 2040 climate target if it becomes clear that countries' forests are not absorbing enough CO2 emissions to meet the goal. Under the current ambition, the EU is aiming for a 90% reduction, 90, in greenhouse gas emissions by 2040 compared to 1990 levels. But because Europe's forests and land use carbon sinks have fallen by nearly a third over the last decade, in part due to wildfires and part due to poor forest management, there has been a new draft proposal. The proposal, which was obtained by Politico, suggests biannual assessments, taking into consideration, quote, scientific evidence, technological advances, and evolving challenges to and opportunities for EU's global competitiveness. The European Commission could then suggest changes to legislation, meaning Brussels could potentially weaken its target in future. There are also proposals to avoid penalising particular sectors, such as more heavily polluting industries, look, car sector, etc., if other sectors can't meet their emissions reduction or absorption targets. It states, quote, possible shortfalls in one sector should not be at the expense of other economic sectors, notably industrial sectors under the EU emissions trading system. The document doesn't propose changing the headline 90% emission cut target, but it does raise the possibility of changing how much international carbon offsets should contribute to achieving the target. Now, these offsets are essentially tokens which one can trade if the EU is unable to get the carbon reduction in the EU, it can get another country to do it outside of the EU and count that. Now, the Commission has proposed capping their use at 3% starting in 2036, but member countries such as France and Poland have suggested 5 or 10%. The document also states that climate goals should not come at the expense of military priorities, a key concern for the EU given Russian hybrid war and the ongoing illegal and imperialist invasion of Ukraine. It states that any climate legislation should take into account, quote, the need to ensure the Union and its member states' capacity to rapidly increase and strengthen their defensive capacity by addressing possible burdens while maintaining incentives for industrial decarbonisation. And this highlights the deepening difficulties in balancing combating authoritarianism and Russia and combating climate change. In a time when the world should be focused on reducing carbon emissions, the dictators are focused on war, territorial expansion, and self-aggrandization, forcing others to respond. Finally, onto other fronts. On the Tanzanian front, the public were barred from the military parade celebrating the election of President Samia Suluhu Hassan following an election that was riven by violent protests and rejected by the opposition as a sham. Key rival candidates were either imprisoned or barred from running. It was more of a coronation. Now on to Serbia. Saturday was the first anniversary of the Novi Sad railway station disaster, which killed a number of people after a poorly made roof at the station collapsed. During the gathering, the mother of one of the victims, Gijana Herka, who was the only one openly protesting since the tragedy, announced a hunger strike. She said she will strike until Alexander Vučić, the current president of Serbia, calls elections, and all of the students which have been arrested in waves of protests since the original disaster are let go. Today is day 3 of the hunger strike. She is currently in Belgrade in front of the National Assembly building, next to a camp of pro-Vučić counter-protesters, which Vučić refers to as students who want to learn and who protest against blockades. But according to my source in Serbia, is mostly filled with criminals. Police are not letting Gijana come anywhere near the assembly building, and allegedly pro-regime individuals have attacked her and people who showed up to support her. This is editing Theo. One of my contacts in Serbia reached out to me and let me know that this was happening. Onto the Ukrainian front, Belgium's refusal to support the EU's proposed 140 billion euro reparations loan for Ukraine may prompt the International Monetary Fund, IMF, to block financial support for Kyiv, which may lead to a collapse of confidence in the country's viability. This 140 billion loan would be financed by Russian money sitting in the Belgian bank Euroclear. The fact that the Belgians are unwilling, or so far seem unwilling, to do this is something that really ought to be corrected. And that's about it for this week. Please tell me in the comments below if I missed anything. I do hope that you've enjoyed this. I do hope it's been useful for you. And if you did, then please like, share, and subscribe. This channel is growing at a reasonable pace at the moment, but we can always make it happen faster. Thank you very much indeed for watching, and always remember that democracy is non-negotiable. Goodbye.